So I want you to sit with something with me for a minute. I want you to ask yourself, when I say the following thing, what happens inside you when I say it? So if I were to start this episode by saying, today we're going to talk about Jesus, what just happened inside you? Did you clench up? Did you relax? Did you get excited? Did you get afraid? We'd really like to know. So please, if you're watching us on YouTube or over at creationspass.com, please leave a comment right now. Let me know how you felt when I said that. What if I said, we're going to talk about original blessing and original sin? How do you feel? What is that doing in your body right now? What if I said, we're going to talk about sin? How did that make you feel? What just happened inside you when I said that? I'm sure you had a reaction one way or another, and it may have been born out of the church that you previously were a member of, or it could just be from the osmosis of living in this society, things you have soaked in over the years. Maybe you felt nothing. That's interesting too. Today, we're going to be talking about why it is we tend to be afraid to share the good news of original blessing. Why we are afraid to talk about our own spirituality and our spiritual lives and the machine that was built up that causes this in us. Because if you found something that's legitimately making your life better, why would you not want to tell other people? What could possibly be stopping you from doing that? So let's talk about that religious residue today as we walk together down creation's paths. Hello, everybody. My name is Charlie. I am a Christopagan druid and priest of Bridget.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian. I'm a Christopagan druid and sous chef to the Dogda.
And today we're going to be going down a very interesting path. We've just finished Pentecost. We hopefully are charged with this energy to go out and to spread the good news about how our spiritual practice and lives have made our just everything better. And then we hit a wall. It's a strange wall. And it's one I think a lot of us are familiar with. Something prevents us from doing that. We've adopted a cultural position that there are two things that you don't discuss in polite society: politics and religion. And today, well, politics and religion are everywhere. No matter what we're doing, if you're paying attention at all to the news, to what's going on in Washington, to what's going on around the country, politics and religion are a part of everything. And so we feel uncomfortable sharing. But it has deeper roots than that. And we're going to dig into that for you today. But before we get into that, if you haven't already, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, whatever the terminology happens to be on whatever app you're listening to us on. It really helps us out a lot. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, don't forget to give us a review. That helps us out more than you could possibly know. If you're interested in learning more about creation spirituality and taking part in everything that we're doing, check out my book, Creation's Paths, was forwarded by Matthew Fox. This is a primer to help get you started on this. This is a primer to help get you started on your path, and each chapter includes a practice that will help you to bring it into your body. They're not just busy worksheets like happen in a lot of spirituality books. We worked really hard to make sure that every practice that we talk about in this book is something to bring the ideas that we just talked about deeper into your body so that you can actually experience what we're talking about. All right, let's just get into it now, shall we? So what is actually going on here? Why did you have whatever reaction that you had when I said what I said at the beginning? Well, there's a long history of that, and we're going to get into that in just a minute. But the main thing that's here is this just cultural fear that I know I felt, and I think you felt, Brian.
Oh, yeah.
That when I say the name of Jesus, when I talk about original blessing, I see people kind of shrink and recoil. I've been in very leftist liberal groups where I've said Jesus, and I've had people go, well, I don't know if we should use that word because that might alienate some people. But the Buddha...
Yeah. Yeah. This cringe runs so deep because, like, we went through this with Christopagan, and which is Christ and pagan together, but like there seems like I've seen a lot of others struggle with this too. Like, you know, they come from a Christian background and upbringing, and they value Jesus in their life. They value the Christ in their life. They have still love for Jesus and Christ and for the message being taught, but they have this aversion, like they can't say the word out loud, or and also even if somebody else says the word out loud, instantly there's like this, you know, I got to attack it. You know, this is a bad person, a bad thing, and it creates this ache, this inconsistency in the mind that really creates a lot of struggle and pain there that I've seen in others. You know,
not to be a shameless self-promoter, but I literally wrote an entire chapter about that in this book, because it's something that we've experienced a lot. And it's basically, are you willing to just surrender anything that's meaningful to you to people who used it in a harmful way? That really is the question there. I'm not willing to give Jesus up because Jesus is my Ishtadevata. And if you're not familiar with that word, it means wished for deity. In the theology of Hinduism, right before you're born, you see the face of the God you will worship in this life. And that's your Ishtadevata. And for me, that's Jesus. Jesus is this figure for me. I've always had a strong devotion my entire life. And even in the darker times where my faith was really thin to the point where I couldn't even feel it anymore, I kept going back to him, to the Gospels, to what it said there, because I find it so powerful and so meaningful. But it was hard for me to talk to other people about it, because I know that when people hear Jesus, they're waiting for me to condemn you. And I know this for a fact because of one of my friends who is an atheist sat me down one day and just looked me square in the eyes and said, "Are you really a Christian?" And I kind of was taken aback by that, almost offended a little bit, but not, not, I knew she meant well. And she said, "I've never met a Christian that didn't just condemn people all the time. I didn't know you could not be that kind of person and still be a Christian." And I looked at her and I was like, I don't think you can be that kind of person and be a Christian, because Jesus told us, judge not lest you be judged, because you will be judged by the same measure that you yourself apply. Which is, by the way, and I said this to her too, why they always go, well, I'm not gay, so I'm going to talk all about gay people, and I'm not trans, so I'm going to talk all about trans people, because then they can say, look, I'm living up to this. I'm not in a homosexual relationship. Therefore, see, I'm good. I can talk about this. That's not what Jesus meant. That is so not what Jesus meant. But that's one of the reasons those goalposts got moved. And I feel that in my own life. There were prayers that I used to love as a child that I found a hard road to get back to saying again, because they were meaningful to me, because of certain people and groups that had misused them and made me feel that, and made me feel that kind of anger by association.
Yeah.
And
You
this
know,
is
sorry.
Go ahead.
And this is one of those things that I've seen too, where I would there was a friend that years ago I would talk with who over and over again they're like, I'm an atheist. You know, would if somebody said they were a Christian, they would start just subtly attacking them, and almost unconsciously had this aversion because it had this ache. And it was through conversations with them I realized that this was just a deep wound in their person, because they still believed a lot of what they, you know, what would be considered Christian belief. If anything, I think I may have finally got them to the point where they would admit they're agnostic, because they definitely believed there's God, there's other powers at work out there. They were not atheistic, but there was this wound, this ache, this aversion. For myself, you know, one of the things I found really fascinating is, after having felt the weight lifted when I understood original blessing and got into it, you know, in interactions with my parents. My parents, I definitely had my mind as being progressive Christians, you know, but when I approached them about the concept of original sin and having to let that go, once again, this aversion, this wound rose up, and they couldn't let it go. They couldn't understand even original blessing. And it had led me on the multi-year exploration into this, because it kind of fascinated me on some levels, and also made me question, and then made me look back at my own journey and the very long process I had to go through to figure out, like, oh yeah, there's this terror from letting go of original sin. Like if going back to like Charlie's challenge at the beginning, if I were to go, hey, you weren't damned because Adam and Eve ate an apple in a garden a long time ago, like, write in the comments right now how that made you feel. Odds are there's probably a bunch of people going, but that's right in the Bible, la 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 la. Well, also Jesus said if your father eats a bitter grape, that bitterness doesn't transmit to you. So
Actually,
right
that's him quoting Leviticus.
It's him quoting Leviticus. Like, there's a lot of Christian and Jewish teaching about how these sins don't transmit from father to son. So how could something that happened a long time ago in a garden that got them banished still be a sin that we're with today? Like, the original sin actually falls apart, but there's this terror because, you know, people, you know, these terrors manifest three different ways. It's the what if I've been believing a lie all this time, right? Like, it really creates a crisis in the mind, and a lot of times it's on an unconscious level. A lot of us aren't even aware. We just have this pain, and we're like, well, what does that even mean? If I've been believing this lie, because, you know, a lot of Christian churches nowadays bring us up with this belief that, you know, original sin. Adam and Eve ate this. Eve was this evil woman that tricked Adam. They listened to the snake, the devil, ate an apple, and now we're all damned. Well, what does that mean? You know, that terror of having believed the lie. Then you have this persistent whisper. The more insidious part of that original sin poison as this whisper of unworthiness. And a lot of us felt that, and especially if you had more of an evangelical upbringing, you know, there's this constant whisper and pressure that you're not worthy. And the third one is this dread. What does it mean if we weren't born with original sin? And we have to own up to everything that we did. We ourselves and we as cultures and people. Original sin becomes this nifty excuse, this nifty, like, well, original sin happened. That's why I did this terrible thing last week. You know, why I cut the person off in traffic and flicked on the bird. Well, because, you know, didn't actually do that, but, you know, like, to name something simple that we've done, that people have done, you know, why did we do that? Well, no, it wasn't because of original sin that made me drive like a maniac and be rude to everybody and be in wrong relationship with them. I was being a jerk. It's the honest answer. You know, if you drive like that, you're being a jerk, and you don't have that cover anymore, but that creates a terror. And so what does that mean And that all those three terrors work both past, present, and future on ourselves on this unconscious level without even conscious awareness, and it creates this ache that I see in a lot of people that we have too.
And I just want to say a brief thing real quick. We are not saying that there's no such thing as an atheist or no reason to be agnostic or anything like that. This is not one of those conversations. What we have learned over the years, especially with some of the more prominent atheists, and you can see this, like Richard Dawkins is mad at the Anglican God he grew up with, and none of his arguments touch the deities that you would find in, say, Hinduism or Sikhism or anything that's not the Anglican God that he grew up with. But there are reasons to doubt, and I am not wanting to sell any of those short, and I understand that. So don't think that we are coming after people who have lost their faith in that way. My main thing that I know I want to talk about today is those of us who still have some kind of faith, or those of us who may have lost it that are still carrying this residue of the cultural faith that we grew up with that told us that we are all broken, that the universe is broken. If you head over to creationspath.com, you'll see an essay that I wrote there where we introduce what we call the 4 thresholds, which are just kind of 4 statements that we use to kind of orient ourselves and help really understand and set in our minds what we are doing every day, and use as a way to kind of introduce creation spirituality to others. And the first one starts with the phrase, "We are born blessed, not broken." That's what I want to talk about, because there's been an entire industry and empire built around not letting us understand that about ourselves so that they can have power and control over us. Okay?
Go.
So now let's walk this idea down. I can hear you laughing.
I'm not actually laughing.
I heard someone laugh. Okay. So now I'm hearing you laugh.
Yeah, I'm laughing. Just like, I'm like, ooh. Too bad we couldn't have gotten the other laugh recording, because then we'd have a spooky recording. That's why I started laughing.
So now let's walk this down the 4 paths. And unlike what we normally do where we start in the via positiva, this time we really need to start in the via negativa, the negative way. What are we letting go of? Okay, it's story time. Once upon a time, there was a man named Augustine, and Augustine could not keep his robe down. Augustine looked at men and women and desired them greatly, and kind of didn't want to give that up when he became a Christian. So he wondered to himself, why is it that I just can't keep my toga on? Well, it must be their fault. How is it their fault? You see, once upon a time, there was a woman who tricked a man into eating an apple. And that apple broke all of reality. So it's not really my fault that I can't keep my toga on and I am desirous of all things. It's their fault. Original sin, at its root, is a get out of guilt free card. That's really how it starts. See, it's not your fault that you get angry all the time, or that you have lust in your heart, or whatever your personal picadillo might be. You see, these 2 people lived in a garden and they broke the universe because they ate a fruit. If they hadn't eaten that fruit, you'd be perfect and everything would be fine. So it's not your fault. That feels liberating. The second half of that is where it goes into high control. So what do you do about this? Well, you see, God hates us so much because we're broken and evil and ugly that he has to basically throw a sheet over us so that he can't see who he's hugging. And that way he will actually love us. And that's what grace is. And by accepting that grace, you get to be covered up so that God can't see that you're a bad person and God can actually love you. Oh, and by the way, only the select elite few have the power to dole that grace out. Yeah, think about that for a minute. This is how this becomes a high control group and why this idea was so useful to empire. Remember, when Augustine originally came up with this idea, he was arguing with an Irishman named Pelagius. I say Irishman, he was at least Celtic. He was from the islands up there. He had an Irish tonsure, so I'm going with Irish. But Pelagius did not agree with this and said, no, God loved us. God would have come down whether we sinned or not, whether Adam had eaten an apple or not, whether Eve had eaten an apple or not, God would have still come down to be one with us because God loves us that much. And grace is actually the power to constantly improve ourselves and make ourselves better. We turn from the wandering path and return to God. And Augustine said, no. And I know you've heard me say this story before. So he went to the Pope, and the Pope said, no, he's right. I don't know what's wrong with you. So then he got a council, and the council said, no, he's right. I don't know why you keep doing this. And then a friend of his became Pope, and he was like, hey, what about this? And that guy said, oh, yeah, that guy's evil. Power's good. Yes, give me this power. And Pelagius was condemned, and everyone who has accepted his idea that, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. Oh, wait, that's John 3:16. Yeah. This was the problem. And this got baked into the cake of Christianity. You see, you need these people in power. And they started doling this power out. Through a misreading of Romans 13, they gave it to kings and states and then eventually nations. Through the Reformation, this got codified into all kinds of different ideas, from Luther's we are only saved by grace alone, and you have no choice in it. Either God picks you or it doesn't pick you, and when God gives you grace, it's irresistible grace. You will have no choice but to accept it because you're a wicked, evil thing and cannot make a choice on your own. To Calvin's, no, we're all just totally depraved. And God's going to pick some of us, so we should better not make him regret his choice. And yes, I know that these are simplifications of both of their ideas, but it is the end result of what both of them taught. And this constellation of ideas from the Catholic, you need the priest to give you grace so that you don't go to hell, to the lottery system that both Calvin and Luther came up with, all come down to us. And we wonder why we have self-esteem issues. Why do we feel broken? Because whether or not you ever grew up in a church that taught you this, if you are American, British, any of the countries that were steeped in this theology, it became a part of the culture. And that idea that you are broken is just an accepted norm. And no, in fact, that's not the way it is. And we need to let that go. We can see this down to today. The government has to control every little action that a person makes because they are too wicked to be able to do it themselves. Why should we give people food assistance? They might spend that on food that's above their station, that they're not worthy of. And I would put it to you very simply. Every time you have either said or heard someone called unworthy, look behind that and you will see the ghost of original sin lurking there, trying to trick us into thinking that we need someone else to save us.
Yeah, even when you look back in context, for instance, with misogyny, right? When somebody goes, women can't be priests. Women cannot be priests. A modern day argument you hear all the time, born from that same original sin down through the ages. Because when you actually look, even in the Bible, Jesus anointed Mary Magdalene to be the apostle to the apostles.
Among Jesus' followers, you have Susanna, you have Joanna, you have all of the Marys.
These females in leadership and educational leadership roles amongst basically what would be considered priests' roles nowadays.
Oh, no, we can go clearer on this. Paul wrote letters to female deacons, which is an order of the priesthood. Remember, and everyone that is an ecclesiastical office wrote letters to female deacons and apostles. Remember, the bishops are supposed to be the successors to the apostles. If there were female apostles, there should be female bishops, because that's supposed to be the equivalent level there.
And a lot of, I'm not going to say all, but a lot of those arguments about females being inferior and everything else, or cannot be priests, all that comes out of because Eve tricked Adam into eating from the apple and getting everybody damned for all time.
And if you read the story, that's not how it happened.
That's not how it happens in the story at all. No. But once again, there's also this dogma over actually reading the text, which goes back to, it's another historical thing that's been handed down to us, this religious residue that's been handed down, because a lot of the Bibles, when after that Calvinism and all that other thought rises up, the Protestants, they were the ones that published and gave out free Bibles in the States. And you got to remember, we're talking back in the early formation of the country in the United States, travel wasn't that easy to do. So most people spent most of their life within 30 miles of their house. This is why cities, especially when you go back a while, they're about 30 miles apart from each other, because that's about the distance of travel. So one city to the next, you could kind of cover that ish. That also means that most people couldn't go to church on a weekly basis because there wasn't a church easily within a traveling distance to the house, because it's not like you hop in the car, you got a 5-minute drive. It would be hours of walking or rough riding because it's not like roads are that smooth, to get to church, and then those multiple hours to get home. And that was if it was close enough. You got to think, if it's 30 miles away, that's a whole day. So it's 2 days. If you're going to go to church on Sunday, that means you lose Saturday traveling and you lose Monday traveling. And so we forget. So a lot of those Bibles were then being read in a household, and or a couple households might get together with somebody who could read, but literacy, comprehension, the context. I mean, history wasn't even invented until the rise of the nation states, which is around the same time period. So there wasn't like all of this awareness wasn't around. It didn't exist. And is still a problem we see today, because we see anybody just picking up a Bible and then talking like they're an expert and they're a scholar. And being a scholar means a lot more than just reading it. You know, they don't even know that this was written in other languages than English, like, even because we've both had conversations with people and they're like, no, it's written in English. And it's like, that was translated into English, which was translated out of this, that, the other. And there's all this cultural context that goes into the passages, as you've heard us talk about before. But
and neither Brian,
and
neither Brian nor I claim to be a scholar. We have put a lot of work into study. We study a lot. We listen to the scholarship as best we can. But the folk that gave us the religion that we have today, the culture that we have today, would hear a traveling preacher go through town, and that's the only basis they had. And these people were literally preaching sermons like sinners in the hands of an angry God. I'm sure you've heard that phrase. You should actually look up and read that actual sermon. It describes God as a spider who spins a web over hell to catch people before they fall in, because why not? And sometimes you go up and just cut the threads and let people fall out of his own free will. What? I don't worship an angry spider god who just like capriciously can throw people in fire. What in the world are you talking about? But when you actually look at what they had for foundations, you can see how they read further. Then you have the printing of the Schofield Bible in the United States, which then had ready-made Bible studies at the end that were all rooted and steeped in these ideas and introduced them to the rapture and everything else. It's no surprise that we got to the place that we in the United States are with all of this.
And it also created another religious trap or residue that we have to let go of, because when we're trying to let go of original sin to make space for, to remove something that wasn't ever there, to make space for what actually is, the other part of the Augustinian trap is what happens to Jesus without original sin. Because once again, because of the dogmas that we've been raised in that have been handed down for generations now, this Jesus died on this guy was killed on a cross 2,000 years ago to save us because of Adam and Eve and the shenanigans in the garden even longer before that. And it's a thing that it happens to all of us. Well, like I said, it might not be conscious, it might be unconscious, but that question of, well, if we didn't suffer from original sin, then why did Jesus have to die? And that's a legitimate and kind of scary question to be faced with. And most people, it's more comfortable with that fight, flight, or freeze. Freeze. It's comfortable just to flee, just to go, well, they're wrong. I'm living under original sin because Jesus had to die, because otherwise, why?
And when you go back to the Christian writers in the first couple centuries, like Irenaeus and John Cassian and others, they do not have any concept of this original sin because Augustine hasn't written it yet. That doesn't come till the 4th century. And they're talking about how God loved us so much, that this was an act of ultimate love, of giving, that Jesus came to this world so that we might be made perfect and whole in him. And there is no concept in them that that Jesus came because of something that two people did, that Jesus came because we were broken. Jesus came because we were so beloved of God. And so this is where we need to be careful. When we're talking about letting this go, like Brian was just saying, it leads to one of two outcomes very often, and we're actually advocating the third way. One, people either harden their hearts, like Pharaoh, and lock in and go, no, original sin today, original sin tomorrow, and original sin forever. And yes, I know I am paraphrasing someone who was talking about segregation, because it's all
hardened their heart. They went through that same machinery. When you're talking about the process, and for those that sat back and went, well, how could Pharaoh go through this and just double down, even though there's all these plagues and stuff? But that's the thing, the process, the machinery, it's always been around. It's kind of, I would almost say, part of their nature. But
the cost of admitting that you were wrong about something that you held dearly for a long time is high. And some people will just double down and just really go into it. Or they throw it all out and just become less than nothing, little ghostly shadows of anything, and just like, oh, love, Jesus, love, sweet, sweet nothings, love, and just float off like dandelion fluff on the wind. And without any substance, without any core, without anything holding them down, they just flutter away. And we can see that in the mainline denominations, as they've just been shrinking over time. The middle way,
I was saying, it goes back to that pain we were talking about earlier, where the embarrassment of evangelizing, of spreading the good news, that a bunch of you probably just cringed when I said that word, because we think of the evangelical movement and all the harms done, but we have to work on being able to let that go, to make space so that we don't go to the other extreme. It's that religious residue from those high control groups. it still needs to mean something, and it still means something. It still has value. And that aversion, it's like the Buddha says, it's attachment or aversion. And these are the two extremes, and we're wanting the third one, the middle way. We don't want aversion. We don't want to give up everything and just be nothing. That's also where the meaningless crisis sits, being nothing, standing for nothing, having nothing. And as Charlie said, we don't want to have attachment to the point where we can't let go of the thing. I always think of raccoons and raccoon traps. They're simply a thing in a cage where they can reach in or grab it, and they can't let go, and they can't pull it out. So they just sit there with their arms stuck because they're so attached. All you have to do is let go and run away. But they'll sit there and be captured because they can't.
And so we're advocating the third way, which is, yes, if you grew up with that, letting it go. If you didn't grow up with that and you just have the cultural residue of it in you, letting it go. And yes, that means harder work, because that means we are responsible for our own actions. But we are also able to change, to be better. Because the biggest lie that original sin has given us, and I hear this from people all the time, is people can't change. They can. I have. Brian has. Many of the people we know have. It is possible. But if you believe in a world where people are intrinsically broken, of course they can't change. That change isn't easy, and it takes work. And that's what we have to hold on to go forward. But we have to let go of all of that other stuff first. So now we move over to the via positiva. What is the blessing, the awe, the wonder that we find here? Well, in the 2nd century, John Cassian wrote, "It is the glory of God." Sorry, I need to look this up again because you scared it out of my head.
Sorry.
Okay. John Cassian wrote, "The glory of God is the human being fully alive." That's it. That is the good news. The glory of God is the human being fully alive. And being able to connect to that life and to make it a part of who we are. We are born in original blessing. We are born blessed, not broken. And once you start really understanding the ramifications of that, you understand that you are not powerless in this world, no matter how much this world makes you want to feel powerless. Just as when you wander off the path, you can turn around to teshuva, repent, turn around, and head back. Everything can be turned around and sent back in the right direction. It's harder the more people that are involved, but everything can. We are not powerless. The whole point that we talked about in the Via Negativa about the original blessing is to make people feel powerless so they accept the authority and power of others over them. This is why Pelagius was scary. This is why this idea of original blessing is terrifying to those in power, and why it scares a lot of people when they first hear it. It shakes us to the core. It shakes us to who we are, because it's telling us this very powerful truth. We have the ability to make change. Just sit with that for a minute. Let me know how that makes you feel. I would love to know that, because it's the exact opposite of everything here. You are not powerless. You are powerful. You are filled with blessing. That doesn't mean everything's going to be great. We've already talked about the wounds many of us carry. A wound can be made in a wound can be beaten onto a blessing just like it can onto anything else. But those wounds can be healed. That's powerful. That changes everything. Just say that with me one time. The glory of God is the human being fully alive. That's the good news. Jesus said, I came that you might have life and have it more abundantly. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and take up my yoke, for it is light and easy to bear. That's the gospel that Jesus taught. Turn around from all of this nonsense and find the better, easier path to more abundant life. Yeah, that's a gospel that's hard to preach under original sin, isn't it? It turns into the prosperity gospel. And we all know how that turned out, where it's all about giving and sacrifice and pain and making sure that you're obeying the authorities in your lives so that they can rain blessing down upon you. No, 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 no. The glory of God, says John Cassian, is the human being fully alive. That is the Christianity that existed before Augustine. That's what we're trying to revive, to bring back. And it never fully went away. This is one of the other reasons they denigrate the women in the movement. All of the female mystics remembered this. All of the great female teachers remembered this. And they taught this. From Hildegard to Julian, Elizabeth of Chanel, Maxwell of Magdeburg. I can go on and on and on and list the great female writers and teachers of Christian history. And that's because they were in that oppressed class. They saw how it didn't work. They saw the liberating power of Jesus, and they found it in their own lives. They found it in the convents, the communities of choice they made together. They saw that there was a path to life more abundantly, and that that's what Jesus actually taught. That's a powerful thing. That's good news worth sharing.
Right.
So as we turn to the Via Creativa and ask ourselves, what is wanting to be born with us in this moment? What is in us wanting to get out? We turn again to the cross. So if it is the glory of God, if the glory of God is the human being fully alive, as John Cassian says, and there is no original sin, what happened on the cross? This is actually a question that pops up a lot in early Christian writings, well into the Middle Ages. And you see a very sharp divide between what we get as answers in the Western Church and in the Eastern Orthodox Church. Because they never fully accepted Augustine's original sin argument. It didn't quite sit well over there. It didn't corrupt all of their teaching. And so what happened there? Well, Jesus tells us what happened in the Sermon on the Mount. When somebody hits you on the right cheek, turn to them your left. If somebody demands your coat, give them your cloak also. When you go to the altar, if you have anything against anyone, leave your offering there, go and make peace with them first, and then make your offering before God. You've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. I tell you, love your enemy. Do good for those who despitefully use you. Those are hard words to hear. But that is the transmuting power of the cross. Jesus took all of the violence that the state of Rome could pour down upon him. The scourging, the mockery, the ignoble death on the cross, being marked with the sign over his head that said Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Remember, it was traditional to put above someone's head why they were crucified. King of the Jews, this mocking tone. And how did Jesus respond to this? Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. To the thief to his side, he said, "You will be with me tonight in paradise." He made sure someone was there to take care of his mother, and he trusted his mother to the beloved disciple. What did Jesus do on the cross? He took all of the anger, all of the hate, all of the evil of this world, and gave back grace. What a better way for us to see the power of this teaching, of this idea, than in its complete enactment. Because in his death, so many thought this is the proof that this doesn't work. But love conquered even the grave, and the message could not be contained by death. Death could not swallow it, and the movement persisted and carried on, taking care of each other, loving one another,
And
building that better.
Sorry, say that again.
Building that better world.
And I think that really is the power of the cross, that it releases grace whether there's sin or not.
I can't remember who said it. There is a medieval manuscript from, I believe, the Orthodox Church that asked the question, would Jesus have been crucified if Adam and Eve had never sinned and we were all still living in Eden? And the answer was yes, because the cross shows the grace of God, that the love of God transcends death, it transcends pain, it transcends suffering, that the love of God is greater than all these things. Because most people don't believe that those things came into the world because somebody ate an apple. Life and death happened long before any humans were around to eat an apple. Predators.
Yeah, and I think that also helps to create in us, when we recognize we're born in original blessing, not original sin. It creates in us this freedom, and there's a slight responsibility along with that, but a freedom that instead of why do people do good things, it's not because we were all born evil and Jesus died on the cross for that to happen. It's because we return good for evil. We transmute we transmute our baser natures, the evil inclinations, the quick fixes, for something better.
I think it's more than that. I think Jesus taught us to be mindful of our thoughts and actions, because if you remember, he said, you've heard it said, do not kill, but I say, even if you think of someone and say, you fool, you have committed murder already.
Yeah.
And when you take that and you look at when Jesus is arguing with the Pharisees, he says, it is not what you take in that corrupts you. It's what comes out. So the whole point of Jesus' teaching is we need to be taking care of what's in us and what comes out of us. That is the power of transmutation. Somebody says something angry to you, what comes back out? Do you respond with anger? Jesus says, no, you don't respond with anger. Why? Here's the important part of that. Why? Violence is like a disease. You hurt this person, so they hurt you back. So you hurt them back for hurting you. And then they hurt you back. And back and forth it goes. The cycle of violence just cannot be stopped.
And we could see that cycle just looking, back in our past, into our history, that violence gets transmitted to the children. That disease is infectious. It will travel from parent to child. And this is where you have clans having wars with other clans for reasons that people don't remember because it happened generations ago, that they're now just at war because they're at war. We look at certain regions of the world nowadays and we go, why is this place still at war? Because they didn't transmute good for evil. They're still passing that disease of violence on generation to generation.
And to bring this like right into the modern moment, like this is why what's going on with Iran is going on with Iran. They created a democracy for themselves. They elected a leader. We didn't like their leader. We deposed their leader and imposed a Shah upon them. They didn't like the Shah. They overthrew the Shah and were mad at us because we put him there in the first place. And you see, the cycle of violence gets started and continues down to today, where they're like, look, you owe us reparations. We used to be a democratic state, and then we had a Shah, and now we have what we have now, and now you're attacking us again. This is the cycle of violence. We're still playing in this dance that started way back. And the only way to end that is to end it. And that's what Jesus is talking about here. Yeah, that anger hits you. You're not a bad person because you thought to yourself, oh, that fool, that idiot. You're bad if that comes out because you're continuing to contribute to that violence, to that wrath, to that cycle of vengeance. That's what Jesus wants us to end. That's what's wanting to be born in us. This peace that passes all understanding. Why would you let somebody just hit you? Think about how incomprehensible it is to us to watch the people marching in Selma with the water hoses and the dogs and the police beating them with their batons. And they didn't fight back. And because they didn't fight back, the conscience of the country was shaken. Because if they'd fought back, then it just goes into the story. There was a riot today. There was a riot today in Selma, Alabama, blah, blah, blah. And it would have just been written off. They interrupted the cycle. And now people had to look at the police state that they were living in at the time and really question, what does this mean? When you see what happened in Minneapolis, we see the same cycle repeating itself there. They responded with taking care of their neighbors, taking care of each other, and peaceful protest. And you can see, well, who is the violent, angry, evil people here? It's obvious. And it shocks the conscience of anyone whose conscience can feel anything that hasn't been numbed already. And that's what we're trying to give birth to. A conscience that feels, that is willing to transmute hate into love, that's willing to give life and life more abundantly.
Or as I'd say, taking ownership for your actions. You know, it's not because something that happened thousands of years ago.
It's so now as we walk the Via Transformativa, what change are we trying to bring into the world? I kind of hinted at some of that interference before. But what we really need to be doing here is gathering the strength and the courage in there and the joy. Remember, it's interference with injustice, with celebration. Bringing that joy to say, no, you, the person I'm talking to right now that's hearing my voice, you were born blessed, not broken. And to have the courage to say that to other people. You are not broken. You may be wounded, but wounds can be healed. It may take time, but wounds can be healed. We don't pretend that bad things don't happen. Bad things happen. That's holding the Via Positiva and the Via Negativa together. That's the message. Nothing is forever. All things pass. In time, even the worst wounds can heal. You may not walk as good as you did before, but we'll find a way for you to move around, to get around, to have life. To learn to have that courage to be, and I'm going to use a word here, and feel how your body reacts when I say this word, to evangelize others with the good news of original blessing. To be evangelical about it. Spread it from the mountaintops. You were created in original blessing. The world is a blessing. Wounds come, but wounds can be healed. We can transform and transmute the pain of the world into blessing through grace. That is the message of the cross. That is the message of the gospel. That is what we are here to preach, teach, and evangelize about. How many times have you cringed already? I'm curious. That's the power of what we're doing here. Justice is equitable. It leaves no one behind. There's a word you're going to start hearing a lot more on the podcast because we made the decision to start using it like Matt used it in Original Blessing. The Anavim. Anawim. The Anavim. The Anavim are those in the Bible who are cast out, the downtrodden, the ones who are kicked out. Because this is how you find out who a culture cares about. If you're throwing anyone out, you're not practicing equity. You are not practicing justice. And you can see the injustices of a society by who they throw out. Is it the strangers? Well, Jesus said that we are supposed to welcome them in and that we will be judged by how we treat them. Now think about that for a minute. How are we treating them? Is it the queer people, the trans people? They're being thrown out. Jesus said it would be greater if we were all eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven. That's a non-cisgendered state of being. I'm sorry to tell you, a eunuch is neither male or female, and even if you want to try to make an argument about whether or not they were, go back and read the literature in any society that had eunuchs in it. There were men, women, and eunuchs. So I don't think Jesus really had a thing about that. We're casting them out. How are we treating our neighbors there? The homeless, the hungry, the powerless, the unemployed. How are we treating them? The sick, the dying. How are we treating them? The refugees, the people in war-torn countries. How are we treating them? Who are the Anavim right now? Who are the people that the system says we have to throw out? Just throw them to the side because they don't matter anymore. That's where you know where the problem is. Because no one should get thrown out. No one should be left on the side.
That's even the challenge, because we're told to visit those imprisoned. And the thing is we have to be honest with ourselves. To put this in more biblical terms, what sin did they commit that landed them in prison? And have they even been given a chance for redemption? Because if we're damning them for all time, that brings up a lot of complicated things that we have to really think about when we're thinking about how we treat people equitably.
Jesus said, you search the scriptures, for in them you think you find eternal life, but you are whitewashed tombs filled with dried bones. I don't want to be a whitewashed tomb filled with dried bones. All of the prophets, the wisdom literature all tells us that we are judged and should judge our societies by how we treat the least of these Anavim, these people who have been cast out. Because once you see that happening, injustice has occurred somehow.
Because we know, we've all, especially if we've been on this earth for a while, have made bad choices. We've made mistakes. We've done wrongs. And yes, we need to make reparations for breaking relationships and being in wrong relationships with other individuals in our lives. But at that same time, that wrong that we committed, is that something that we are damned for our entire life? If we believe in this grace, this redemption, this process that somebody can change and get back on the path. You know, once again, it goes back to that original sin. If we had original sin and we're sin all the way through to the end, it makes it easy to just excuse everything. We need, now that we've let that go, we need to add that justice work in. How does somebody actually make reparation? How do they make amends for the bad choice? How do they get back on the right path? And when do we let go of that? Forgive for ourselves, for our own healing, and for theirs.
And I wrote a lot about this in Kingdom Rising, in the chapter on Paul and his redemption story and what that looked like, and how to actually gauge whether or not someone is ready to be brought back into the community. Because there is a formation practice to come back. You have to turn around. You have to make restitution. You have to find a path back home. And I cover that in that essay on Paul, because it's not as simple as just, oh, you said you're sorry. Sometimes it is. But if somebody violates your trust, how do you build trust back up? We can say, well, once trust is violated, it can never be restored. Well, that's everyone ending up blind and toothless, because we all break trust, even in simple ways, all the time. We have to have a way to bring people back and figure out what that is. What does that look like? But living this transmuting power of grace in the world is the change that we are asked to bring, and not letting ourselves off the hook that it's too hard, or those people don't deserve it. There's that evil word again. I talk about it a lot. When you're talking about deserving and worth, you're living in original sin, not original blessing. We have to get rid of worth and deserving. They're not going to serve us well going forward. So as we're going out, we always like to give you a practice that you can do right now. And this one is a Irish breath practice. It's very simple. We're going to use that phrase, we are born blessed, not broken. Say that to yourself. Recite it like a formula over and over in your mind. I am born blessed, not broken. I am born blessed, not broken. And say it until you feel it. Let it live within you. What does that mean? How is that working within you? Just let yourself feel those words. We are born blessed, not broken. We are born blessed, not broken. And then, when you're ready, we modify it. We shrink it down. We are born blessed. Just that. We are born blessed. And then say that to yourself over and over again until you feel it inside you. And now we shrink it again. Born blessed. Born blessed. Over and over till you feel it in your body. And then just the word blessed. 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 Until you feel it in your body. And once you feel it, now you just go to your breath. Don't say anything. Just live in this place that you've found now. Let yourself explore it and see what you find there. What well of original blessing did you just dig for yourself? And as we're heading out, I always like to end with a blessing. And I'm just going to use those words back at you. You are born blessed, not broken. And so you can turn around and change your life. And in changing your life, you change the world. Amen.
Amen.